Every once in a while, an actor that one of us doesn't like very much does something so good, we just can't deny it. For me, that's Eddie Redmayne in The Trial of the Chicago 7. For Bev, that's Sean Penn in Milk. You might say she loathes the man. Loathes. And so might she. But I know she doesn't do any loathing when she sees him in the movie we're about to discuss. His performance is fresh, it's premium, it's even fairly traded. Okay, it's not fairly traded. But Sparkplug Coffee is. It's also indeed premium, and they've got the freshest Arabica beans in this country we call Canada. They offer decaf and half-calf, just in case you're thinking of using a "I had too much caffeine" as a bullshit legal defense for why you murdered somebody. Make that two somebodies. I mentioned Canada. Well, Sparkplug ships to customers up here for free, and it'll arrive in a week, or even less. Americans get that same week or less promise too, although they will have to pay for shipping. Blame customs, or homophobes. Sparkplug has an assortment of blends and roasts. If you're tired of drinking what you drank back when there was snow everywhere, then try a different seasonal blend. You should include yourself in the Autopilot Coffee Club. Membership gets you perks and deals that the Dan Whites of the world don't get. Plus, you members will save money on every order. See, he doesn't get anything, does he? It doesn't work out for Dan no matter what happens. Poor guy. You can cancel or even just pause any time. Those are a few reasons this isn't a Coffee of the Month club. You can set things up to suit you. So go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. You'll get a one-time 20% discount by using our HYES promo code. You get something great, you save some dollars, and we get a little help with our production costs by raking in a small amount of buckaroos. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed hearing about the coffee. Now let's hear about a biopic about one of the most important activists of the 70s.
And action! Have you ever seen
Milk? Hi there, movie monkeys, and thank you so much for downloading, streaming, or finding our podcast on YouTube. This is the 526th time we've released a show on this channel, and, just like in almost all of our previous 525, we will be spoiling the movie in question. My name is Ryan Ellis, and I want to recruit you. And here's my wife, that commie, homo-loving son of a gun, the lady who doesn't blame her sweet tooth for her premeditated actions. Very premeditated. Bev.
That's me.
That commie, homo-loving son of a gun line is the first thing Sean Penn said to the audience when he won the Oscar. Things were so political in America, certainly by 2008, with Obama's election. And I'll talk about Obama again in a few seconds. But anyway, it was a fun little moment. I know you don't like Sean Penn, but this was a great speech. But we'll get to that in a few seconds. The coming attractions opinion question. So far this century, the Best Actor Oscar winner, I think it's 14 out of 23 times it's been based on a real person, including this movie. So is your favorite performance of those 14 Forrest Whitaker in The Last King of Scotland, or Jamie Foxx in Ray, or Colin Firth in The King's Speech, Sean Penn in Milk, or one of the other ones?
Well, I am allergic to biopics, so there's actually a lot of them I've never seen. I think I would say Sean Penn. His performance is exceptional, but I just hate him so much. I can't do it. I was going to just mess with you and go with Eddie Redmayne for The Theory of Everything, but I couldn't do that to you. Not fair. No, don't worry, babe. I take it back. But I'm going to go rogue and go from last century and pick F. Murray Abraham for his performance as Salieri in Amadeus, which is the rare biopic that I really love.
That is going rogue, because that's not the time frame I said.
Nope, that's right. I'm cheating.
And I didn't write an answer down, so... Well, I did,
well, what
I think,
is your favorite?
But it's not on my iPad. I love Sean Penn in this movie. It's a great choice. Jamie Foxx was a great choice from Ray, although he didn't sing. I'll go with Sean Penn, then. You Gotta Give 'Em Hope was released 15 years ago by Focus Features on November 26th, 2008. It came out then to qualify for the Oscars, but got a wide release at the end of January 2009. I think I probably saw it then. I'm not really sure, but I don't think I saw it in 2008. The film did not light up the box office domestically, but factor in worldwide totals, and then it came pretty close to tripling its budget. All right, Bev, the movie is 15 years old very soon, so please give us the skinny and tell us what Milk is all about.
Sean Penn is Harvey Milk, a real activist who lived in San Francisco in the 70s as it was becoming a draw for gay men from all over America. Milk is a charismatic presence in the Castro, where after several failed attempts, he gets elected as a city supervisor and as the first out gay person to win elected office in California. Milk works hard to stop the homophobic Prop 6 from passing, drawing the ire of fellow Representative Dan White, who takes the loss so poorly that he resigns, then comes back with a gun to assassinate both Milk and the mayor.
Or, in a nutshell, I've got three of them, just like last week. Harvey Milk was once a Republican. I guess this was back when that party actually stood for staying out of people's personal lives. And they did. That is true. I don't know that they liked gay people, but they probably said, hey, you know what? This is all about staying out of people's lives. I'm going to be consistent, which they do not do now. Number 2, leave people the fuck alone, which you've heard me say many times lately. We don't all have to get behind every single cause and be completely for it. Just leave people alone, especially people in this group, this big umbrella of group. Well, actually, he talks about a lot of other people. We'll get to that soon in this podcast, of people he wants to help unite. Malcolm X-esque. Another great performance, by the way. Did not win the Oscar, though. Denzel in Malcolm X.
Yeah, I looked that up. I was going to say that, but I was like, but he didn't win.
My third nutshell, to steal from a movie you love, I Love You, Philip Morris. Gay, 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 gay.
I love that movie so much.
And that does fit this movie because it is quite a gay movie. They're not trying to pretend it's, we just, behind the closed doors, that's what, there's a lot of kissing. Sean Penn kisses James Franco in one of the first scenes, or is it the first scene? No, because we see the build-up of things. We'll get to in a second.
We see them in bed together. Yeah. They're very much a couple. It's not sanitized for straight audiences.
Right. And
it's a little sanitized for straight audiences.
Not
but
that much,
I think at the time it came out, I wouldn't call it radical, but it was pushing some boundaries.
Especially Sean Penn doing this, and for that matter, James Franco.
It would have been much braver if the movie had been made before Brokeback Mountain, but Brokeback Mountain really did push the boundaries, and they weren't punished for it. Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal were instead rewarded for their performances in that movie. It didn't hurt their careers at all, and I think that was the sea change that maybe actors were waiting for. And I think back then, and maybe even still now, a straight actor playing a gay character was for a long time, and maybe still is, kind of the equivalent of a hot actress playing an ugly character. People are so easily impressed by it. How much humility must you have to damage your reputation, to your image, by doing something that I think most people in 2008, whether it was right out there on the surface or still latent homophobia, would have considered a smear on their career and on their image. Part of the reason why I think straight actors who play gay characters earnestly and believably are more likely to be rewarded. How long ago was it that Rami Malek won the Oscar for a terrible performance as Freddie Mercury? He's a good actor. I like Rami Malek, but
Hanks in Philadelphia
so
as well.
bad.
And Hanks has said he wouldn't be able to play a gay character now. He doesn't think so, which I don't think is really fair or right, but we'll get to all those issues in a minute, but let me set everything up. I know we're going to probably go all over the place in this episode. Very political one, too. The Rotten Tomatoes critics, though, 93% of them like this film. 8 out of 10 is the average. There are 246 reviews on the site and 89% of audiences. It was 89th at the box office in 2008. We covered The Dark Knight, that was number 1, and Heath Ledger went on to do that soon after Brokeback Mountain. Iron Man was number 2, we covered that, and Slumdog Millionaire, one of the competitors for Best Picture that year, was 16th, and we covered that as well. We know Penn won the Oscar as second. He'd won for Mystic River a few years before. And Dustin Lance Black's screenplay also won. Pretty good choice, too. He was nominated for Best Picture. Gus Van Sant for Best Director. Of course, he got nominated for Good Will Hunting, which we covered last year. Josh Brolin for Best Supporting Actor. Elliot Graham's editing. Danny Glicker's costumes. And Danny Elfman's music. I wonder if Brolin's nomination was a make good for not getting nominated for No Country the year before. It's a good performance, but Oscar-worthy?
It's a good performance, I totally agree, but not the level of difficulty. And I actually feel like I don't know Dan White that well. At the end of this movie, it still felt shallow. I don't understand truly why Dan White did it, and I guess nobody does. I don't want to make the movie about his murderer, but I think there's a case to be made that that's an interesting story of what drove him to commit a pretty unprecedented act for a sitting elected official.
Well, he had just quit, so he wasn't sitting anymore.
Okay, but how often does an elected official commit assassinations like that?
I think the scene in RoboCop is based on that. The scene where the guy has hostages and he gets thrown out the window and bounces. I want my job back. I think that's based on this, which I didn't know anything about when I first saw RoboCop. I'd never heard of Harvey Milk or those things back in 87 or so when I saw that film. But yeah, he quits, wants back in, and he kills the mayor first, played by a gay guy. So the guy who's, I think, supposed to be straight.
We're the only gay actors in the movie. Like,
Victor Garber and Dennis O'Hare.
Yeah.
The mayor is very sympathetic to the causes. He's very happy to help out Harvey, and he's always smiling when he's signing bills and things that Harvey helped push through. But the actor himself is gay. I don't think George Moscone was. And then the guy who plays the bigot, the Senator Briggs, Dennis O'Hare, I didn't know this till reading about it, but he's gay too.
That's interesting that the gay actors they cast in pretty straight parts.
Right. No, there are a lot of gay people in the movie, but not in major speaking roles.
Yes.
They're in the Castro area. They're in the camera shop. They have roles and lines and things, but they're not the major characters. As for those Oscar speeches, I like Black's quite a lot. He talked about his parents moving him from a strict Mormon neighborhood, I think, to California, maybe even San Francisco. And basically that saved his life, I think, is what he was getting at. He praised the filmmakers. He saluted Harvey Milk as he should have and talked about equal rights. I don't think Penn talked about Harvey Milk, and I'm not sure about that. But that's the one oversight if he didn't, because I love his speech. I think it's one of the best ever. I love the build-up, too. This is back when they had 5 people come out who'd won before for the Best Actor and Best Actress presentations. They did this for a couple of years. I think it was 2008, 2009. And it took a while. It's an 8 or 9 minute segment on YouTube. Robert De Niro spoke about Sean Penn, and then Michael Douglas was the one who did the main thing here the Oscar goes to. And Penn had worked with both those guys. I think he was fairly close to them. Douglas in The Game and De Niro in We're No Angels. He hugged them both. So anyway, he talked about the right people, the filmmakers. He praised Van Sant and Cleve Jones. I think both he and Black mentioned Cleve Jones, who is the M.L. Hirsch character in this. And I think the real Cleve has a role in this as well. But then Penn, the reason why I like the speech so much, because all those things are good, and we know that Penn has a humility problem. He admits he makes it hard for people to like him sometimes. He says that. The commie, homo-loving son of a gun I talked about at the very beginning of the speech. He said that when he first got up there. But he also talked about the boycott outside the building, I guess about this movie. And he was saying something along the lines of, you should rethink what you're doing because your grandchildren are going to be ashamed of you. That's a good message to send to somebody, which is don't just wag your finger at them. Say, you know who's going to do this is people that know you personally. Not me, Sean Penn, not all of us in this room, but people you care about and love. He talked about gay marriage. We have to have equal rights for everybody. That was 7 years later when they finally did in America. We already did in Canada a few years before this. He talked about Obama being elected. He said something about how I'm proud to live in a country where we elect an elegant man president. That was coming off of Bush. Little did we know what was ahead of us 8 years later. And then a really great touch at the very end of his speech is he says, my brother, Mickey Rourke, rises again, because, of course, he was in The Wrestler. I think the better performance, and Rourke needed it more. But Penn, I didn't love Mystic River, and I didn't love his performance. I think he was good, but he'd been good for so long. It was the make good in a lot of ways for other movies. If they knew he was going to do this, they probably wouldn't have given him the award for Mystic River. Anyway, I think Mickey Rourke should have won, but it was nice that Penn honored him.
And Mickey Rourke had won all the other awards leading into this. Yeah. I thought he was a lock.
So this is my second San Francisco set movie this month because I covered Bullet. That wasn't intentional. And it's also another LGBT, the other letters that are on there. I'll probably screw that up a few times because there's so many letters that are in that thing now. But we covered EEAAO, a lot of letters there too, just last week with a lesbian daughter. Now we've got all these gay men and a lesbian as well with, she's a lesbian, right? Yeah, right. Because they say she's married and has kids, but maybe she's married, she can't be married to a woman unless she lives in Canada.
But that's the title card at the end.
Well, the real person,
So she's married now. Doesn't mean she got married back in the 70s.
No, but
or 80s.
That had to be to a man, though, is my point, though.
But not if she got married after, when did that pass? 2010?
No, the movie's out in 2008, and
oh, yeah, you're right.
gay marriage was 2015. Anyway, So the real Anne Cronenberg, Alison Pill plays her. So when it ended, I felt like I always do about this movie. I think it's an excellent biopic. I love most of the performances, except for maybe one. And I think it's one of Van Zant's best films, although I prefer Good Will Hunting, which I've seen so many times and still will. But I still love it. It's one of my favorite movies that year. I know you don't quite, but go ahead.
Okay. I don't like biopics. They're phony and predictable and a real dumping ground for the worst wigs and makeup in the business. Milk, while being a pretty paint-by-numbers example, it tends to avoid the worst pitfalls. It sets a scene in this beautifully authentic way. It doesn't over-aggrandize Milk as our hero, nor does it turn Dan White into some frothing-at-the-mouth villain. Mm-hmm. I personally adore the documentary about Harvey Milk called The Times of Harvey Milk, and I think that both films really benefit from Harvey Milk himself, who was a very interesting, passionate, highly charismatic subject. Part of the reason why Dan White targeted him, I'm sure.
All the things Dan's not, you mean?
I think Dan White probably recognized how dangerous he was as an activist because you couldn't help but like him. He just had this warm, cheerful nature that won people over. He had this real great sense of humor about himself. Mm-hmm. The whole line, I'm here to recruit you, playing on the joke that they think that gay men are out here to recruit you. And just deflating this whole terror that they have about gay people. He was a very effective activist, and he was proving himself to be a very effective politician.
Not even a year, by the way, was he in office.
I know. Pretty incredible. He could have accomplished a lot.
Well, that's one of the big tragedies of him getting killed. Not just that he got killed, and he meant so much to all these people here, but he wanted to do the job. One of my biggest complaints about poor victim in Florida, oh no, is that the laziest man in the world wants to be president so badly, but doesn't want to do the job.
Yeah, so many people get into politics because of their egos instead of to actually do the job of being a legislator or a lawmaker, a politician. Your job should be politicking, not winning elections. So anyway, I give this a thumbs up, which is a roaring endorsement for me, a known hater of both biopics and Sean Penn. I don't find it moving the way you find it moving. The first time I saw The Times of Harvey Milk, and maybe that doesn't help me with this movie either, is that I love The Times of Harvey Milk so much, and the way I was gutted by that film the first time I saw it. How could it live up to it? I know the story so well, and The Times of Harvey Milk is a rather unsentimental film. It's a very point-and-shoot, talking heads, traditional documentary, and they had tons of incredible archival footage to work with, and they certainly didn't reinvent the wheel. I mean, it came out in the mid-'80s. Doesn't feel like a documentary from the 80s. It moves at an incredible pace, and it's just such an incredibly moving story about a very important movement. And when I saw that for the first time, I had no idea who Harvey Milk was. I think it was in college. I was pretty young. So I was so blown away by that movie that it's hard for me to come to this movie with its script, with its actors, with its hair and makeup, with its Danny Elfman score that I did not love.
Oscar nominated too.
I know. Telling us what to feel and when, and then I almost resist falling for the emotional cues in it.
I didn't feel teary when this was over. I don't think I ever have. I've seen it many times, so maybe I have one of those times in the past. I don't recall. But then they don't go for tears. We see James Franco and Alison Pill, so Scott and Anne, going to the service, and there's only a few people there, and then Scott even says, this is it for Harvey Milk? I don't know why they didn't know there was a giant candlelight vigil.
Well, they did, but, the movie had to
drama.
Put it in there for, yeah.
So they go outside and they join that, and then they show real footage of this. Apparently 30,000 people marched, and I don't think there was any violence. Or was there? And then for once the cops actually didn't fight against the gay people.
Well, it was a memorial. Lots of protests are peaceful. Most protests are peaceful. Mm-hmm. We just don't hear about the peaceful ones. So I totally believe that 30,000 people could march. Look at the Women's March or the March for Our Lives. There was no violence at either of those marches. There were millions of people.
No, I just thought that they said on the title card or something like that something happened, but for once the cops didn't inflame the thing or make it out to be that, oh yeah, the gay guy over there gave me lip, so I got to beat on him, even though the guy probably didn't do anything. The movie
pretty strongly establishes that the cops are not on their side.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the cops are one of the most dangerous things in their lives. The cops will definitely hurt them, potentially kill them.
What we see the very opening is black and white footage of mid-century gay guys having to hide their faces when they're in, I guess, gay bars. And that's a national shame. And to think that so many people who have power now want to bring that back when the average... not the average person, but the mass, at least of America. Of course, we're Canadian, but I think we share a lot of the same values. They drive me crazy sometimes the way they are. We're not like that in some ways. But I think in general, we're like the Americans. And I think if you were to poll 100 people, they'd probably basically agree, at the very least, like I said, leave them alone. Let them be married. Certainly don't try to keep them apart. Clint Eastwood's view on that apparently a long time ago was it's hard enough to find somebody in this fucking world. You're going to try to stop them from being together. And I think he meant also be married, but at least to be together. So to think this ever happened is bad enough. I think it's supposed to be the 50s and maybe the 40s and obviously into the 70s. And then we've had this time, it hasn't been that long, that anybody who wants to marry anybody else can. And they should. Two consenting adults. There's all kinds of reasons for it. One of the big ones is because if your partner, who before you couldn't marry, you're with them for 30 years or something like that, then they die, maybe they were the breadwinner, you could be left out with nothing. If their family didn't like the fact that their son or daughter was gay or lesbian, then you could be just out on the street, even though you're with that person for decades.
Yeah, I think it's very easy for someone like you and I, a couple like you and I, to really take for granted all the ways we benefit from our love being publicly accepted. I mean, it means when we bought this house together, nobody blinked an eye. When we adopt animals together or foster dogs together, we don't have to pretend we're roommates. It means that our families very much love us. It means I can talk about you at work. I can be open. We can be open in public. I'm sure everybody who sees us together in public knows that we're a couple.
The world is better with all these things for gay people, though. Because in 2004, the election, Karl Rove, Bush's campaign manager, I guess, made it about God, gays, and guns. And that's part of the reason why Bush won and why Kerry lost. And 11 years later, gay marriage, law of the land.
So it wasn't that long ago that if we were a gay couple and our co-workers found out, we could lose our job. those pictures, it's actually quite moving that they start with those archival pictures of the gay clubs getting broken up by the cops and everybody trying to hide their face. And it's just heartbreaking to imagine, oh my God, their lives could be ruined if people just find out that they're at a gay bar hanging out. Let's be honest, I'm sure some of them aren't looking for love. But that's their business too.
We see a couple of very quick hookups in this movie. First of all, of course, by Scott and Harvey. They go to bed together almost immediately. If that's based on the truth, well, and I think Scott was still alive to have talked to the filmmakers. I'm not sure. Cleve certainly was, because Cleve was such an important part of this. I think maybe Anne was too, part of the filmmaking team, or people they consulted at least. But they show Scott and Harvey in bed very quickly, kissing on the subway platform almost right away. And then later on, it's Cleve and, I can never get their names right. Which one was he? It's either Dick or Rick. Dick, I believe. Dick Pavich. He and Cleve go in a back room. I think it's the night when Harvey wins the election.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's at least some oral going on there, if not more.
Which is at least probably a pretty accurate depiction. There have been some, I don't want to say great, because I didn't actually like these movies, but some very gay movies that came out last year, Fire Island and Bros, that I didn't love as movies, but I did love that they seemed to show gay culture a little more warts and all. It didn't feel like it was sanitized for straight people.
Yeah, right.
So there were some pretty bawdy scenes, especially in Fire Island. I'm sure it's R-rated. They were certainly flirting with NC-17 rating, and they were showing scenarios that would turn off a lot of people. Let's put it that way. Sex going on in back rooms, characters that were meant to love and root for doing some pretty slutty stuff. But probably an accurate version. I mean, definitely an accurate version. It was made by exclusively gay people. So they know what goes on, and they're just trying to show an accurate version of their lifestyle. Now, a movie like Milk, you know what? Stuff like that probably was going on as well. I did read that they left out a lot of details about the non-monogamous nature of Harvey Milk's relationships with these men. They straight up called him polyamorous, and they just decided, no, you know what? America's not ready for that. They just want to see him have a committed, monogamous relationship with one man. Would they include those kinds of details now? Hard to say. I mean, he's a national hero, and they may just not want to necessarily get into it. Which, when you think about it, is so stupid, because who cares?
Mind your business.
Mind your business. If he wants to do that and he's not hurting anybody, and also that's his personal life. That has nothing to do with the stuff he's fighting for. People he's fighting for, people like teachers, because Prop 6 that they're fighting against was the proposition that anybody who's discovered to be a homosexual and who's also a teacher can lose their job, and also anybody who supports them. Right. What a vague definition.
What does that mean?
How do you ever define that? But kind of miraculous that in 1978 they managed to stop it from getting passed.
Even Ronald Reagan, who was running for president, I think by that point, or was going to, was against it.
Yes, that's right. What's her name? Anita Bryant?
Anita Bryant.
Who was just an entertainer and I guess a raging homophobe who made it her life's mission to mess with people's lives, was a huge backer of this bill and basically quit her job as an orange juice spokeswoman to campaign for this bill to pass.
When she helps it get passed in Dade County in Florida, that's what really mobilizes everybody in the movie out in San Francisco.
Yeah. Tell me what you think about the film's choice to not cast an actress to play her, instead to rely completely on stock footage.
She's only in maybe 3 scenes, so you don't need a real person to be cast, so it's fine.
They could have written scenes for her. They could have made her a whole character in the film, but they decided to kind of leave her in the background. They tell us what's going on. You know, there's the device where Harvey is dictating his will into a tape recorder. Whether that ever happened or not, I have no idea. It's certainly a pretty convenient narrative device.
Literally saying, in case I'm assassinated.
Yeah, in case I'm assassinated, here's my life story, conveniently laid out for you, narration style. And he describes Anita Bryant and everything that she stood for and everything that she did to campaign for Prop 6. And I think a lot of movies would have cast her and had scenes with her the way they did with Dan White. They decided to make him a character.
I think you have to cast somebody for Dan White and for the Senator, John Briggs, because Harvey interacted with them, especially Dan. He didn't interact with them. He maybe never met Anita Bryant, for all we know. I think you get the gist of it. We don't need to see any more of her than that. I remember when Clooney made Good Night and Good Luck, somebody said, why'd you get somebody to be so bad playing Joe McCarthy? The commie hunter, if you want to call him that. That was Joe McCarthy, the actual guy that Clooney used.
Really? That's amazing. I do love the choice. I totally agree with you. I think it's an interesting way to approach it, and I think it grounds the film in reality because they are consistently mixing in this stock footage from the time. You know when you're watching stuff that's stock footage, and you know when you're watching the movie, but the way they shot the film, that desaturated, grainy, I assume they actually shot on film, maybe it was made in 2008, so chances are it was probably still the dominant medium that you would shoot in, but it's a beautiful stock of film that really puts you in time and place. One of the things the movie does really well, and I think one of the traps that it escapes of the typical biopic, one of the things that drives me crazy in biopics, period films in general, can just be hopelessly guilty of broadcasting their time and place like an air raid siren. Hey, it's 1954.
Well, this one had...
Walk Around the Clock is playing.
This had graphics on screen that literally said those years, though, too. 78.
Yeah, sure. Movie would say it's 1954. Then they would play Rock Around the Clock. Then every woman you see is wearing this crisp, brand new swing dress, and every car is a shiny, brand new Chevy Bel Air. Just like in 1954, right? Everything's way too shiny. Nothing looks lived in. But Milk strikes this really beautiful balance. There's no outlandish wigs, Josh Brolin notwithstanding. And also maybe Alison Pill's hair is a little much, but I've seen pictures. That's really what the hair looks like.
Brolin with white, he looks quite a bit like him.
He does, yeah. He looks good. Actually, his hair doesn't bug me so much. I think the only ostentatious wig is maybe Alison Pill's, a little bit Emile Hirsch at some point. But it didn't call that much attention to itself. The look of the film puts you there. Feels like watching one of those old Scorsese films, right? Okay. It has that same look. And, of course, it matches the stock footage that they knew they wanted to mix in with the film.
The costumes and the cinematography weren't nominated, but the costumes were. The set decoration, art direction, set decoration, and the cinematography were not nominated, but could have been.
The Oscars just love flashy production design.
True. Well, the production design wasn't, but the costumes were at least. So, you mentioned about Anita Bryant being the real person in real footage, and we see her maybe 3 times. We also see an actress playing Dianne Feinstein. I checked, because when you do a search on the IMDb and put in F-E-I-N-S, that's enough, you see 2 entries, because the real person does the real announcement, and you hear people scream in the background. They hear that both the mayor and Harvey were shot and killed by this maniac. But then she is in one of the, or at least, if not a couple, of the boats. I think she's the one that he hugs.
Oh, okay.
And this is now the senator in California who a lot of people say, or is that boxer? No, it's Feinstein, isn't it? That really should retire because she's just not there anymore.
Yeah.
And she's literally not there for votes, but she's also not there mentally anymore.
And she took over for the mayor after he was killed, right? Wasn't she then the
Oh, maybe because she's the one that announced it. So.
Mayor, and did she become the mayor of San Francisco?
I don't remember that, but her announcing it tells me that maybe she did.
And she's the one that says, I hear Dan White's around. Maybe you should just avoid him. And, of course, Dan White is around, and he's looking to kill him. That's the next encounter he has with Dan White.
Well, what about that? The defense used what people have called the Twinkie defense. It wasn't as simple as that. It was more a matter of that his mental state being what it wasn't helped by the fact that he was on a sugar high or something like that.
I think it was the junk food was meant to be evidence of his mental state. Look, he must have been really depressed because all he ate was Twinkies and junk. But also they could say, but the Twinkies and junk made his state of mind even worse because the sugar crashes or something. It's insulting is what it is.
Well, even if you want to be a homophobic jury, what about the mayor? Who, in the movie, not the actor, but the mayor, was straight. Don't you care about that guy who was killed first?
That's just how homophobic this jury was.
I guess so. And also, he reloaded the gun, apparently. He shot more than 6 shots. They show 3 into the mayor and 4 into Harvey. And there was a big delay. Now, also, when Sean Penn goes to his knees, the last thing that Harvey sees, at least in this movie's portrayal, is the opera house where he had just gone, maybe the night before, recently before that. He saw some big opera and loved it. I don't really think we needed that scene, but okay, fine. I think you can see, if you look in the background, Dan fiddling with something. I think he's putting one more bullet in the gun. Huh. How is that not premeditated? If he was just going there to kill the mayor, which is bad enough, he doesn't need anything more than a couple of bullets, and he's got at least 7.
And I don't think that the bar for calling a murder premeditation is even that high. He knew not to come in the front door of the building to avoid the metal detector. Broke in through a window. He wasn't supposed to be in there at all. He certainly wasn't supposed to be carrying a weapon.
Sure.
He arranged to be alone with the mayor. Then left, arranged to be alone with Harvey Milk and killed him. And didn't kill anybody else. He clearly had a mission. And as much as it may have been driven by passion in some sense, that he was deeply upset and he somehow thought killing this man was going to solve his problem, I think the movie's rather kind to him. As somebody who is...
As is Harvey.
Oh, yes. Harvey is.
He's empathetic.
Yeah.
He worries about him.
But I mean, the way the movie's written is very kind to Harvey Milk. We don't really know what went on.
And Dan.
Yeah, it is what I mean.
Okay.
You're saying that Harvey's kind to him, and I'm saying the script is kind to Harvey because he's our hero, omitting details of his love life, can we really trust how his interactions with Dan White really went? The movie is going to paint a picture of a man who's exceedingly reasonable and kind and empathetic towards him, and he doesn't vote his way on the mental hospital because, as he says to him, I don't need your vote. You don't have anything to offer me in exchange for this vote because I have all the votes I need to get my proposition through.
And Dan says, I don't trade votes, but that's what he's trying to do with that.
Totally. So he's being pretty reasonable, but also very kind and approachable. The movie could paint Dan White out to be a mustache-twisting villain.
He's not, though.
You brought up The Trial of the Chicago 7, a movie that I also enjoyed, but I think one of the flaws in it is, well, maybe it was really what happened, but that the judge was so evil.
I heard that was real.
We're just watching an egomaniac railroad this trial and ruin people's lives out of his own sense of self-righteousness or whatever his friggin' problem was. And a lot of biopics would turn Dan White into that kind of a villain. Instead, you get a rather sympathetic man who has an inner life. He has a family. I don't think they adequately explain why he did what he did.
No, they don't.
But I also think that the movie gets let off the hook for punishing him in the screenplay because he killed himself. Because he punished himself. This is a man who is obviously tortured. He doesn't need to be punished anymore by the public, by Hollywood. His tale ends tragically anyway.
Do you think that Harvey's right that he's a closeted gay man?
That is a great question, and I certainly thought about it. You have to question what would motivate somebody to be this angry about progress. It could have been that it wasn't really about homophobia, that it was simply about him being embarrassed by a gay man. There's homophobia, and then he's like, well, I just got taken to school by a gay guy. The shame associated
You can't humiliate me, Harvey.
Yeah, exactly. It's like one thing to be humiliated by another man. It's another thing to be humiliated by a gay man. So that could have just been an intense level of homophobia that he was reacting to.
But he shows up to Harvey's birthday party when he doesn't need to do that. And, of course, Harvey goes to his kid's baptism when he doesn't need to do that. The only one who does.
That's politicking.
I guess so, but I think they portray, at least in this movie, that they maybe could have been friends if Dan could have got over his shit a little bit.
Yeah. When he shows up to the birthday party, isn't that the one where he's really drunk?
Yeah.
And
Dan is, yeah.
The movie only says it from the point of view of Harvey, where Harvey says, well, I think he's a latent homosexual. And everyone's like, I don't know, Harvey. I don't think they show any indication in Brolin's performance. I don't think there's anything else in the script that gives that away, but of course the public doesn't know, so it wouldn't be right for the movie to say anything other than someone else speculating, probably revealing that there was a lot of speculation at the time that was what would have put him over the edge.
It's always a stereotype when somebody is obsessing about homosexuals in any kind of way, when they don't need to. Maybe there's a reason in some cases why you have to have this be a topic.
Over and over.
But a guy that goes on and on and on about it in the locker room or at a bar or in your friends group, it may be a cliche, but you go right to, why does he care about this so much? Is he one of them? Does he want to be one at least?
It's like when you've quit smoking. We all know people who quit smoking and then become the most anti-smoking person.
My aunt.
Yes,
Same
your
with
aunt who
drinking.
quit drinking and then became the most holier-than-thou, judgmental, anti-alcohol, anti-partying, anti-anything fun. Ugh, who do you think you are? There's nothing insightful about herself in any of that. And it could have just been what she needed to say and what she needed to spew in order to keep herself in line. And so I think a lot of homophobia is people just trying to keep themselves in line. Who knows? Maybe Anita Bryant was a latent homosexual as well. We could fill books with examples of politicians, especially, who turn out to be gay, who are raging homophobes and who try to support pretty terrible laws that are oppressing gay people.
But if they were honest, they'd be in that group.
They are in that group. They just don't want to be honest with
publicly
themselves.
Is what I mean.
Yeah. So the fact that Dan White, in the end, killed himself demonstrates a level of self-loathing that maybe is further evidence to that. But I've never heard anything else evidence to.
He only got a few years of manslaughter is what it was, too.
Yeah, I think he served less than 5 years. And then he was free for 2 years before he died by suicide.
So let's get back to the man of the hour, the man who's in most scenes in this movie, Harvey. And his voiceover, where he's recording his speech into the tape recorder. I like that, by the way. I think that's a pretty good touch. But he says that people flock to the Castro, becomes very gay-friendly, and then gay-friendly businesses flourished. The liquor store owner is hostile with Scott and Harvey in one scene, but then later on, the place is full. I'm not sure it's supposed to be all gay people necessarily, but then Harvey comes in, and it's not like the guy says anything to him. maybe it's almost like, well, I'm making money off of your people, so fine, I'll accept this. But we never really see that guy again. We don't see any kind of payoff where he become friends with Harvey or something like that. I guess you just have to show homophobia from somebody who does one of those, hi, good to meet you, you and your kind won't last. But we don't really ever see a payoff to any of that kind of stuff.
But, capitalism is a hell of a drug.
And that might be what it is, yeah. Because if you were, as he says in the voiceover, accepting of gay people, you did well. If you weren't, you didn't.
We don't need you to be gay, too. We don't even really need you to like us. We just need you to put up with us.
That's what I'm saying about this whole situation.
And then we'll support your business. This guy clearly didn't like them, but he obviously kept his mouth shut and cashed in.
Yeah. Harvey literally stands on the soapbox in one scene. That's a fun little thing. It actually says soap on it. It's almost like a Bugs Bunny routine.
Yeah.
That's good. And that's when he first runs for city supervisor. Of course, you're basing this on a true story, but I like that. It's not really a touch, I guess, because it's real, but he lost over and over, but he got more votes each time. And then when they did some redistricting, ironically, the thing that we always hear about is such a negative for Democrats and helps Republicans in the states. Oh, Mitch McConnell, make sure of that. He benefited from it. Harvey did. And of course, Harvey was a Republican, not at this point, I guess. And then he becomes a Democrat and runs against a Democrat as well during one of these. He does run for state assembly. That's when it's against the Democrat. Doesn't win that one, but eventually becomes a city supervisor, and that's the job he has for not even a year. But you gotta love how determined he and his friends are that he keeps running for these elections and loses, except he is gaining, and maybe that's why they feel like they can get ahead. It's also fun, too, that I guess Scott was always his campaign manager, and when he leaves, he doesn't get fired, he leaves Harvey and he leaves this campaign and leaves this whole team. I don't know if he goes very far, but he's not with them anymore. Cleve is hired, and of course Ann's a big part of it too, but Cleve's supposed to be the campaign manager, I believe. Then Harvey wins. Get rid of Scott.
Maybe
win.
Scott sucked. Maybe that was a Nepo hire. Yeah. He was sleeping with the boss. Yeah. So.
And to hear Dustin Lance Black and Sean Penn say at the Oscar speech, Cleve Jones was vital to making this movie. Emil Hirsch has done a lot of things. We've never covered him before. He'd worked with Sean Penn the year before this, though, being directed by him in Into the Wild, a movie I really like an awful lot. So he would have known him pretty well, and they have quite a few scenes together. You could make a movie about that guy. And I think he was pretty well played by Hirsch. Do you agree?
I don't know much about the real guy.
Well, I don't either. But
yeah. It feels like he's doing an impersonation of somebody. I know a lot of people loved his performance, and...
You didn't.
I didn't. Emil Hirsch is another one I'm not crazy about.
Okay.
The three main characters in this movie, or three main actors in this movie, they're all straight men. And they're all straight men who have a history, pretty well-documented history of treating women very poorly.
Franco being the third one.
Sean Penn and Emil Hirsch, there's nothing disputing this, have fully assaulted women, and James Franco has been accused of multiple sexual assaults.
You mentioned they're not gay, we knew that. But it's interesting that the filmmakers are, at least, the director,
yes,
the writer, and both producers, Bruce Cohen and Dan Jinks, who'd won the Oscar for American Beauty, which has some homosexual themes in that, too, because Chris Cooper's character is a closeted gay man.
Yeah, closeted, latent homosexual.
So they made that movie, and then they could have won for this, too. I think they probably should have won the Oscar for this one as well. Lance Black hasn't really written that much since he did this. He wrote, or was one of the writers on J. Edgar for Clint Eastwood. And I'm not sure that it's supposed to be that J. Edgar Hoover was actually gay, but he was supposed to be at least a cross-dresser, at the very least. I guess had to be private about it. And Black also worked a lot on Big Love on TV, which you've seen, I haven't. But he doesn't have a lot of other credits beyond that. And here's an Oscar winner. I wonder if that's a homophobia thing, or maybe he just hit a home run with this script and never wrote anything good again, apart from Big Love.
It's a story we come across lots of times, especially with screenwriters. They can have a hit and then not have another film made for 15 years or something. They have these enormous dry spells. We have a friend who was a writer who had one film get made, Cube, but he said he made way more money after that on screenplays that never saw the light of day.
Right, yeah.
He made more money writing scripts for studios, requested by the studios, that still never got made.
Right. What about the line by David Goodstein, who is an important and powerful closeted gay man in San Francisco? We see him quite a lot through the film. He's there when Harvey wins the election. But he's the one that says, the more out you make us, the more you incite them.
Well, this is an interesting concept because Harvey Milk wanted everybody to come out, and he was campaigning for LGBTQ+. I mean, they wouldn't have called people that then. He was, I think, specifically talking to gay men because it's clear that lesbians were not really part of their movement.
They push back hard on Anne when she comes into the picture. They resent the woman.
Gay men are not immune to misogyny. That's definitely true. And I think they have less of a use for women than even other movements. This is a tale as old as time. We look deep into these civil rights movements, and almost always people will fight for their own rights but push women to the side and even step over them to win rights for black people, rights for gay men.
But what about the whole thing about the more out you make us, the more you incite them?
Well, I don't know where I stand on this. I'm a straight person, so I just wouldn't know where to begin to think about this. My first instinct would be to say, you don't know people's lives. You cannot guilt them into coming out. People need to take care of themselves. Why don't you make it safe for them to come out, and then they'll come out? But then in another great documentary, How to Survive a Plague, is that what it's called?
I guess
about
so.
the AIDS crisis. Came out in the last 10 years. I can't remember when, but a wonderful documentary with a ton of incredible archive footage about activists working during the AIDS pandemic. Maybe it was Harvey Milk that said this, but they said, if every gay person in America turned purple tomorrow, then everybody would realize that they don't just know somebody gay, but they love somebody who's gay, and then homophobia would end immediately. Well, when the AIDS crisis happened, a lot of gay people essentially turned purple. They couldn't hide anymore because they got sick. Rock Hudson, that's a great example. We didn't find out till later what was really going on. Freddie Mercury, another example. The public loved these men, and then they discovered, oh, wait, they're gay? And I think it probably happened on a personal level, too. We talk about Cleve Jones a lot, his great legacy, and what an incredible legacy is that he was the man behind the AIDS quilt, one of the greatest acts of activism in the movement, an incredibly moving work of art that really painted the picture of how big the crisis was and how loved these people were. They're not the villain that Anita Bryant wants to paint them out to be. They're not groomers that the current Anita Bryants of the world would like us all to believe, that there's danger from gay people.
Let me give you my response to this thing.
Okay.
So I think the comparison would be, and I'm not saying this is right or just, I'm just saying I think this is the comparison. Look at Florida especially. This is where woke goes to die. Woke has been misused by people like Ron DeSantis so much in the last few years. I'm so tired of the word, I know you are too. I say socially aware or those kinds of things. What does the word mean? It means somebody was treated badly and now you're aware of it. That's what it means. The people can't explain it, I think. Simple as that. I didn't know black people getting killed the way they are in America by cops. I've seen footage of it. I have been awakened. But I think that's what we're talking about when this guy says, the more out you make us, the more you incite them. I'm not saying that people that want rights, or at least to just be respected and whatnot, when it comes to anything that's a socially aware thing, it's a huge amount of things that are now the last 5, 6, maybe even 10 or so years, far beyond being different sexually by being gay, lesbian, what have you. But DeSantis and people like that weren't triggered by any of these people. They've triggered themselves. So I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm saying that that actually made me think of what's happening right now, the last really only about a year or so since he really took up that mantle, DeSantis. I don't know that he really cares about these things so much, but he knows that a lot of his followers do. So that's the thing. The guy says that line. He's a gay man saying that line. Don't stir him up. Well, I don't blame people for wanting rights, and I don't blame them for saying and doing some of the things they've done the last several years, even though some of it is annoying. But this is what DeSantis would say, is that you got us all riled up.
Yeah, they would be like, well, if you didn't want us to attack you, then you would have stayed in the closet, which is no way to live.
Yeah. One of the nice scenes in this movie, too, I think it's based on reality, and I feel like I've heard Dustin Lance Black say somewhere, it wasn't the Oscar speech, that he called, if not Harvey, somebody, and was going to kill himself. And then that person, Harvey does in this movie with the kid from Minnesota, Paul, I think is his name, he says he's going to kill himself. He's in a wheelchair, so he can't just leave. Like Harvey says, just get out of there. Get to San Francisco. We'll take care of you. How can he? He's in a wheelchair. He probably has no money anyway. But then he calls Harvey again later on, and he survives. It's like those scenes in a couple of baseball movies that Chris and I covered, where some kid sees the superstar, Lou Gehrig, or Babe Ruth later on. I was the little kid that inspired you a long time ago. Well, this is not quite the same thing, but it's similar enough. I found that very moving. This movie and Love, Simon can literally save kids' lives. If they see what's in Love, Simon, even more so than this maybe, they probably know this more now anyway, because our society is more open and you can find your tribe online. As much as online can be a bad, negative thing for kids, it can also be a lifesaver. And movies like those two, and many others, but Love, Simon, and Milk can keep young people, or anybody, I guess, from going or bang or jumping off a bridge or whatever they might do. Realize they've got a chance to be with somebody who's going to accept them and maybe even love them, and maybe they'll have a great life if they go somewhere else. Maybe they don't have to leave where they live, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, and just see examples of people like them who are real people who are living their lives. And maybe it's not perfect, but they find their community and they find their tribe. I like the scene where he meets Cleve Jones for the first time. And I can't remember where Cleve Jones said he was from. Arkansas or something.
It wasn't San Francisco, though.
Yeah, or maybe it was Texas or something.
Maybe Texas.
Well, what was it like being the gayest little boy in Texas? You see in Emile Hirsch's performance, you see the trauma there. You see that he doesn't want to talk about it. You see that something he's trying to leave behind. But then you see through the course of the movie that they make their own family. They make their own future. You don't have to stay the gayest little boy in Texas being tortured by your neighbors and potentially your family. I'm sure there's obviously trauma associated with that, but just because you start your life with trauma doesn't mean that you don't have a future. And that's the hope that they're delivering. Like you said,
Gotta give them hope.
yeah, it makes these films important. What kind of movies were being made about gay people in the 70s? Cruising? Was there anything that had a positive portrayal of
Maybe, but
gay
probably
characters
not
in the
a
70s?
mainstream
Really?
movie.
Even by the 80s, you might have seen this and that. In the 90s, you might get something like Tu Wong Fu. Actually, Tu Wong Fu would probably have a hard time getting made now.
Are they gay in that movie?
Yeah, they're drag queens, but they're all gay.
I don't think I've seen it, so I don't know.
Oh, you've never
Philadelphia is
seen
a better example because you cast a guy who was not really a giant star. Hanks was actually in a bit of a downturn in his career after the big stuff in the 80s, like Big and Splash and so on. And then Antonio Banderas, no one really knew who he was, I don't think, at that point. But they are so chaste. Now, he's got a disease that's killing him, and maybe Antonio Banderas, or the character, wasn't going to kiss him and do everything else because, A, the guy's getting sicker and sicker, and B, maybe you don't want to take the risk of getting what he's got. But people pointed out that movie was too nice, maybe, but it also probably had to be because it's a mainstream movie.
Yeah, came out?
By a guy who just won the Oscar, making that Jonathan Demme with a guy who was at least a known quantity and a star of some kind, waning or not, in Hanks. And of course, then he became one of the biggest players ever in the next years that followed, won the Oscar for that performance. I like Philadelphia. I haven't seen it in a long time. But I think you almost had to make a movie like that was maybe a little bit too nice, versus a movie like this 15 years later, which is far more openly gay, with all these straight guys, granted, I know, and now movies can be made more likely that can be as open as they want to be. And if you don't want to watch that...
You can make a movie like Fire Island with literal orgy scenes that are just commonplace.
And if you don't want to see that kind of thing that grosses you out, don't watch it.
Yeah.
That was always true about every movie.
Okay, the movie's not for you. It's for that kid who's the gayest little boy in Texas to watch that movie clandestinely one day and be like, okay, I do have a community out there.
Now, I mentioned they got to give him hope a few times in this podcast. I do like that line, which Harvey gets from some other politician as well, which is interesting. Maybe that wasn't real, but that's what this movie shows. Also, when he's dictating, he mentions that line. Of course, that's the last thing he says. That's in the trailer, I think, too. He says it twice. You got to give him hope. You got to give him hope. He's also shown with Scott in bed when they first met, saying, I'll never make it to 50. And, of course, he died at 48, so he was right about that. And I guess he did actually say that in reality. And this is another thing that's so inspirational. I don't think this movie came out before the Cheers list. I don't think it did. I think the Cheers list came before this did. So I think it would have been on there for a lot of reasons. And one of them is that whole bit at the end where he says he wants to bring all the us's together. He talks a lot in the whole story about helping out seniors. I think he has their vote when he runs for various types of office over the years. Not just gay people. He's got the seniors on his side. And he mentions, I think he says African Americans. That may not have been a common expression back in the late 70s, but okay, fine. But he's trying to bring them together. And he doesn't really mention women and lesbians. But I think this guy reminds me so much of what Malcolm X is shown to be in the movie Malcolm X. A guy who was just anti-white people. They're the devil. That great scene where that young girl comes up. What can I do to help your cause? Nothing. Walks away. But by the end of the movie, Malcolm was talking about things like Jesse Jackson did later, which is let's bring everybody together. Well, he has a speech. I think that's real. So yes, he was trying to do the opposite of what he was doing before, which is to push people away who weren't like him, didn't look like him. And I think Harvey would have been the same. And I said it before, one of the great tragedies of the fact he got killed, there's a lot of them, is that he loved doing the job. He would have worked a 15-hour day if he could help people.
And he was effective.
And a lot of politicians, even some of the ones we like, don't work that hard and don't care that much. So I like that, the us's. Maybe you are as a woman in the us's, but I know I'm not. But I support the cause, and I try not to be against the us's, at the very least. Maybe that's not enough, but I try. Sean Penn, of course, is the star of this movie. The kinder, gentler Sean Penn in this. This is so unlike most of what he's ever done. I love the scene where he talks about, Dan says, you can't procreate if you're gay. Well, we've been trying, and whatever that line is, it's so cute. He's got such a cute look on his face. I never thought of Sean Penn as a cutie, but he was there. We covered him last year in another performance, actually, that was cute all the whole way through, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and certainly the funniest thing he's ever done. And I forgot that he's got a cameo in Being John Malkovich. I think I mentioned last year we'd never covered him before, but he does have that small cameo in Being John Malkovich. Okay, so if you were to have cast Harvey in 2008 with a gay man, or if the movie was made now, who would it be?
Oh my God,
because for one thing, by the way, Robin Williams was talked about for playing Harvey long before. They tried to make the movie long before.
I'm so glad they didn't cast Robin Williams. I saw that and
Too
I was
much?
like, oh no, I shouldn't say that because sometimes Robin Williams, gives beautiful, subtle performances. And I think his career best performance was with Gus Van Sant in Good Will Hunting. So, okay, I take that back. Maybe he could have done a lovely job. I need a list of actors in front of me before I could make a call on something like that. The first person that comes to mind, although he's probably too old for the part now, would be someone like Rupert Everett. And I say that because he has alarming charisma that I could see him pulling off. I don't know if he's a good enough actor exactly.
I'm not sure he looks enough like him, too. They made Sean Penn look quite a bit like Harvey Milk.
Yeah, but it's not like he's a dead ringer.
No.
So they cast him because he's Sean Penn as well.
Does it bother you, in retrospect, even, that they cast a straight guy to play this character?
So...
I don't think we should be in a world where we can't ever have straight people play gay people.
Okay, so this is where I stand on this. When out gay actors, like Rupert Everett, are casually cast in straight roles, starring roles like this one, until you cast someone like, I guess, Andrew Rannells to play someone like a young Ted Kennedy or something, and we watch Andrew Rannells casually share a love scene with an actress, and no one bats an eye because acting is acting, as they all say. I just want to be able to play anyone I want. Then I think we can stop criticizing productions for giving gay parts to straight actors. But as it stands, like I said earlier, this is still happening all the time. Us straights, we're doing great. And as much criticism as they receive for this, it doesn't seem to stop Hollywood from casting straight actors in the roles. They'll make the argument, well, we just need big stars. Yeah, but you're the same machine that's keeping out gay actors from really becoming stars. We've talked before about how the number is few of gay actors who are out, who routinely play straight characters. Ian McKellen's a great example, but he didn't come out until way late in life, when we already knew him very well as these very iconic characters, which in fairness don't seem to have any sexuality. I'm thinking of Gandalf and Magneto. We never see them have any kind of relationship. But most actors, once they come out, tend to not really get cast in a straight part ever again. Actors who people loved, like Neil Patrick Harris, like Dan Levy, like Jim Parsons, where are their straight roles? They don't get them. That said, it gives me no pleasure to say this, but Sean Penn gives a truly beautiful performance. He portrays Milk with that unstoppable cheer, but always a real complexity behind the smile. He's worried, he's cautious, he's optimistic. He's also cutthroat about achieving his goals, and he's so comfortable in his own skin. It's a great impression of Harvey Milk, and it never devolves into an impersonation. He really disappears in the part. I just forget that it's him. It becomes Harvey Milk to me. So it's hard to imagine anyone else portraying the character because he does such a beautiful job. And that's from someone who's seen the documentary about Harvey Milk with all that archive footage many times. He said that he just basically, whenever he wasn't on set working, he was watching. There's tons of archival footage of Harvey Milk that he would just be in his trailer watching that footage over and over again so that he could always live in the skin of Harvey Milk and pull it off. And he really does. I don't know how I would recast it. I'm never good at coming up with actors off the cuff like that.
Well, I thought you might have something like that prepared. I don't have anybody in mind because I think they cast a guy who did a great job. Emil Hirsch, I talked about Into the Wild for Penn the year before this. He was also Jay in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which we are definitely going to do next year. The final Tarantino movie until he makes another one that we will cover because we've done everything else he's ever made. I like his performance. It's not a big one, but I think he's pretty good in that. Josh Brolin, we covered No Country for Old Men, the Oscar winner, many years ago. We did that. I love how he's both Thanos and Cable in the MCU, multiple characters. And apparently Matt Damon was in line for this, but then had to drop out for, I think, Invictus with Eastwood. Damon looked the part too. They both look like Dan White enough, just in general, without having to put all kinds of makeup or hair or whatever on. You said he had a bad wig. I think it's an appropriate wig.
I don't think it's a bad wig. I think it's the only hair that seems like a wig, but it doesn't really stick out that much. I agree. I think Matt Damon would have played Dan White really well. I could see him pulling it off a lot.
Working with Van Sant again. He'd worked with him a few times, not just Good Will Hunting, but also that movie Jerry I mentioned that he did with Casey Affleck. So here's the problem in the whole film. I think both performance, but also maybe the way the character's written, although it's based on a real person, I think. Diego Luna as Jack. Now, we did Y Tu Mama Tambien.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about him much yet, have we?
And now he's playing Cassian Andor in Andor, which got some Emmy nominations, and people love that. They think it's one of the best Star Wars things ever, certainly the more modern era. I didn't like this guy the first time I saw him in this role, and I've never liked him since. I know he's supposed to be a little bit annoying, but he goes so far over the top with this 5-year-old act that I wasn't glad he killed himself, but I didn't miss his character once he was gone.
If you're going to include his character and all of his idiosyncrasies in the film, he's a fairly big part of that chunk of the movie, maybe you owe us an explanation for why Harvey's with him. They're like, why are you with this guy? He's a complete liability. He is acting nuts. And he says, well, because when I go home, I don't have to talk about politics. I just hang out and we do our thing and I can relax. But he's like the least relaxing person in the movie.
Right, it's true.
He stresses him out all the time. He's completely unpleasable. I think he's playing like he has borderline personality disorder.
Sense.
He kind of is acting like that, whether they would have given it that name back then or even in 2008.
Contrast to Scott, though, where apart from getting angry with the fact that Harvey keeps running for office and doesn't realize he's putting a target on his back, but Scott is usually, I think, a pretty calming influence. The scene with the dinner. I love the way Penn plays that, too. I just want to say one thing. This is the most wonderful meal I've ever seen in my life, or something like that. And they kiss, I think. That's a good moment. Franco, by the way, we've covered him only once. Spider-Man 2. I think I said that in that podcast. Very up and down. Sometimes he's great in a film, and sometimes he's really bad in a film. I never really liked him that much as Harry in the Spider-Man movies. And apparently Bradley Cooper and Chris Evans both auditioned. Cooper was still new to movies. He'd made some, I think, at this. Yeah, he'd made a few movies at this point.
He would have been probably mostly known from Alias at that time.
And also Wedding Crashers, where he's the bad guy. Chris Evans had been around for a while. I think he would have been good in this movie, too. This is not unusual anymore, but all those people are MCU veterans now, including Franco at the old Spider-Man movies. Anyway, Franco, performance, fine. I
like his performance. I think Gus Van Sant has a real touch with actors, and those three main guys, not counting Diego Luna, because I 100% agree with you, his performance is so over the top that it sticks out like a sore thumb in the film. But I think Franco does a really lovely job, and Emile Hirsch also did pretty good.
Alison Pill, I don't believe we've covered her before, but I did with Chris on Scoring the Movies when we covered Goon. The Newsroom ruined her for me. As great as Aaron Sorkin is as a writer, we both hated that character so much.
I've never been able to look at her the same since. Just about everybody who is in that show I hold in lower esteem now because of that terrible show.
I love the very first episode. I watched the scene where he yells at people in an auditorium many, many times. Jeff Daniels did a good job, I think, all the way through the show. But that scene especially, I love that. But if people wonder what we're saying right now, it's when she goes up to him at the desk before a very important night of news. And I just want you to know, I'm going to get in your love life right now. And it was about, what's her name? Emily Mortimer, I believe, played her. What in the fuck are you doing? And he wrote it this way. Sorkin wrote it that way. It wasn't Pill's fault, but that's why we don't like her.
Everybody in that show
that was just one example, too.
One irrational decision after another. Yeah, I was thinking of a completely different example where she just completely loses it on a bus tour in New York for no reason. What a bad television show.
But she's good in this movie. Victor Garber, we covered him not that long ago in Sleepless in Seattle. Of course, he's in Titanic as well, Legally Blonde and Argo. So 5 movies now for Garber, at least. Maybe there's more, but those 5 anyway. Dennis O'Hare, so both he and Garber are actually gay. I didn't know O'Hare was. I wasn't shocked that Garber was. I think you mentioned that before in one of the other movies we've covered. But O'Hare we'd never have covered before, and he's done a lot of things. He's got 100-plus credits, dramas and comedies and all kinds of stuff. Dallas Buyers Club, he's in that, but apparently he's a gay man playing one hell of a bigot in this movie as the senator. And many people played extras for free, and I'm guessing a lot of those people were probably in the LGBTQ plus. Did I get that right?
Well, it was all shot in Castro District. They really did go to San Francisco and shoot it there. So not only would you be more likely to get a lot of people who were in the LGBTQ plus community, but probably a lot of people who just worship Harvey Milk too. I mean, he's such a hero for the country, but imagine the esteem that that city and that district in the city must hold for him.
Van Sant we've covered twice before, To Die For and Good Will Hunting, those comedies, but of course he's mostly an indie director of those weirder movies like Jerry, something that very few people have even heard of.
He'll either make something like Jerry or Elephant or Last Days or My Own Private Idaho, one of the films that first got him noticed, but it's a very strange film.
Or Drugstore Cowboy, Good Will Hunting, Milk.
Finding Forrester, these almost journeyman films. Very conventional films. And Milk is a very conventional film, a very well-made conventional film, but it's not trying to break the mold. It's not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's certainly not trying to do something brand new like a lot of his more arty films. So I guess he does the one for them, one for us philosophy of filmmaking. My favorite movie of his, of course, is the movie that we have covered, To Die For.
The film is 185 to 1. We saw it on our Blu-ray. I think it's on a few of the streaming sites. I feel like I've seen it on at least Prime or Netflix, but we saw the Blu-ray. Cinematographer, Harris Savides. He shot other Van Sant films, I think quite a few of them, in fact, and some Fincher films, including, I believe, Zodiac the year before this. That was a beautiful film. The editor, Elliot Graham, was nominated. He also cut X2 a few years before this, and then Molly's Game, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies. And the composer, Danny Elfman, We've covered 9 of the movies he's scored now. Scrooged, Edward Scissorhands, To Die For, Good Will Hunting, A Simple Plan, Spider-Man 2, and Silver Linings Playbook, which, by the way, Coen and Jinx also produced. And I mentioned Bradley Cooper. Well, of course, he's the star of that. And, of course, De Niro was at these Oscars that year, hugging Sean Penn, and he's the other star of that, or one of the other stars of that. So I guess we talked about the look and the cutting and all that stuff. You like those things. You didn't like the music, I know that.
I think in like the first 5 minutes of the film, I was like, I already hate the score.
What happens next? Well, I'm going to get a little political again. Same-sex marriage was legalized in America in 2015, and gay people finally got all kinds of rights they never had before. So they have those rights in the United States still, for now. The Supreme Court is on the job. At least the world in general is far more accepting of people who aren't straight than they were even less than 20 years ago. Karl Rove made sure of that, and then 11 years later, law of the land. So those are at least some pluses, even though people like, I guess maybe DeSantis and Trump, but certainly the Supreme Court and an awful lot of people that aren't even in office want to see rights that were given to people not even 10 years ago be stripped right back.
You can't put people back in the closet. I just have to believe that they're going to lose. I was born the year that Harvey Milk died. I'm 45 years old. Generations have been brought up with this attitude that there is nothing wrong with not being a cis straight person in the world. And just because bigots like Ron DeSantis are getting some traction doesn't mean that they're going to win. So I have to be optimistic about it.
Gotta give them hope.
Gotta give them hope. You gotta give them hope. And you gotta fight. You can't sit on the sidelines. You gotta vote for these candidates. You gotta speak out. You gotta support your LGBTQ plus neighbors. And you gotta have hope if you are, man.
I think a lot of older people actually are far more accepting than they were even 10 or 15 years ago.
As the world has changed to make it a safer and happier place for everyone, nobody has suffered. What's the worst that could happen? Literally nothing bad happened. Nothing bad came of gay people getting more rights.
It tainted my marriage. How?
That's insane. That doesn't even make sense. So I think everybody lives with that truth, and that's why we're going to win. I have hope.
Okay, then. Milk, a movie I think is still outstanding. You're more of a slight thumb up. But your last thoughts on MILK.
I think that Milk is proof
MLK.
I know
I didn't realize that's right now.
I didn't know you said it out loud, and I was like, oh, hey, what do you know?
Also, a very important civil rights leader who was shot and killed by a bigot.
Wow, yeah. So I say that Milk is proof that when you have a director with heart and vision who's massively talented and actors who hit it out of the park and everyone else at the top of their game, you can make a biopic that's watchable. And even if you love this film, which is fine, of course you did, it's a very good movie, you should still see The Tides of Harvey Milk. I can't recommend it.
Oh, I agree with that too. I think we have that movie in the shelves downstairs.
It's on Criterion now.
Well, as gay as this movie is sometimes, and it should be, it's actually more political than it is homosexual, I think. It's about politics so much of the time, a usually boring topic. But it's a hell of a biopic by Van Sant with good performances all around, except for maybe one. And talk about a director getting you wrapped up in a story, which he really does here. I had this, I think, 8th on my top 10 list that year, but I should have put it in the top 5, and it was my favorite of the Best Picture nominees. Even though Slumdog was fun, I think The Reader was up for the award that year. Dark Knight, of course, famously wasn't. This, I think, was the best of the Best Picture nominees, but at least it did win 2 awards at a time when it still wasn't as cool or okay, acceptable, to be out and gay in the world or in Hollywood. But it was getting there. It was starting to be better at that point, I think.
Oh, definitely.
So that was our review of Milk. In 4 days, I'll be reviewing a classic boxing movie all on my own. I was going to cover it for Scoring at the Movies, but Chris and I called it quits on that podcast in early June, and I didn't want the work I did to go to waste. So on July 28th, I'll be yammering on about John Garfield in Body and Soul. As for when Bev and I talk to you again, that'll be next Monday, when we'll go back to the year 1993 yet again, and this time we'll be covering the one that went on a hard target search of every gas station, residence, warehouse, farmhouse, henhouse, doghouse, and outhouse in that area, as we talk about The Fugitive. The Coming Attractions trivia is all about the guy I just did a minute ago. I didn't know what to come up with here. This might be an easy question. Sometimes the trivia questions are hard, even for movies I've seen many times and like a lot. So The Coming Attractions for The Fugitive. It might surprise you to learn that Tommy Lee Jones has been in 2 superhero movies because it doesn't seem like those kinds of films would interest him. But he made one for Marvel and one for DC. Name them.
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about The Fugitive. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51, or you can reach us by email, haveyouvrseenpodcast@gmail.com. And you can also find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
Bev, let's give him hope that we'll eventually shut up and end this podcast.
And cut.